You might believe the primary output of your operation is corn or soybeans, but the fundamental currency of global agriculture is nitrogen. Every harvest executed without a legume in the rotation acts as a withdrawal, effectively stripping the soil's nutrient bank account. Research confirms that integrating legume cover crops increases soil organic matter by a range of 8% to 114% compared to non-legume counterparts. This biomass radically alters water infiltration and erosion rates, marking the difference between a system that hemorrhages nutrients into local waterways and one that captures them for the next yield. Yet, the entire industry currently relies on a single volatile input. The modern agricultural engine runs on a gas that constitutes 78% of the atmosphere. Yet without industrial intervention, plants will starve in the midst of this invisible plenty. Biological systems cannot directly metabolize inert atmospheric dinitrogen, creating a bottleneck that severely limits growth. To overcome this, the 20th century introduced the Haber-Bosch process, a method of brute force chemistry that utilizes immense heat and pressure to fuse nitrogen with hydrogen. This synthesis converts fossil fuels into ammonia, a tremendous feat of engineering that has driven an 800% increase in global nitrogen fertilizer consumption since the 1960s. While this massive scaling currently underpins the food security of approximately half the global population, it transforms agriculture from a solar-driven enterprise into a fossil fuel-dependent industry. Immediately after application, the inefficiency of this synthetic delivery system becomes glaringly apparent. Research indicates that roughly half of the synthetic nitrogen applied to farm fields is wasted, never reaching the crop it was intended to sustain. A significant fraction of this volume is lost through volatilization, where the solid fertilizer reverts into a gas and evaporates into the air. This is not merely a benign escape. The resulting emission is often nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas with a warming potential 273 times greater than that of carbon dioxide. Current data attributes approximately 7% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions to this specific agricultural leakage. While the atmosphere absorbs one portion of the waste, a substantial volume dissolves into the soil moisture, moving downward rather than upward. Through a process known as leaching, nitrates bypass the root zone entirely, percolating into groundwater and eventually reaching local waterways. Once in the aquatic system, this nutrient load triggers eutrophication, causing explosive algal blooms that deplete oxygen levels and suffocate marine life. It is estimated that 30 to 40% of lakes, rivers, and aquifers now suffer from this nutrient pollution, creating vast aquatic dead zones that threaten biodiversity and water quality alike. For the producer, this environmental calculation translates into a severe financial hemorrhage. Synthetic fertilizer frequently constitutes over 1/3 of a farm's operating budget. When 50% of that investment leaves the field through denitrification or leaching, it is effectively capital evaporating into thin air. The challenge facing modern production is no longer just about determining application rates or improving soil testing. It is about addressing the fundamental porosity of the delivery mechanism. No strict logistical protocol can fully mitigate the losses inherent in broadcasting soluble salts onto an open growing environment. This persistent systemic failure sets the stage for a biological alternative that operates with significantly higher precision. Unlike the volatile application of synthetic compounds, nature utilizes a method to synthesize ammonia directly at the site of demand. Research confirms that integrating legume cover crops can reduce nitrogen pollution by an average of 48%, with some systems achieving an 89% reduction by preventing runoff and scavenging excess nutrients. This solution does not require high-pressure factories or heavy fossil fuel inputs to function. Instead, it relies on reactivating a dormant biological partnership that predates industrial chemistry by millions of years. To access this capability, we must shift our focus from the industrial factory to the microscopic architecture of the root system. Beneath the soil surface, a complex biological trade agreement is executed between the plant root and specific soil bacteria. This interaction is not a passive cohabitation but a precise microbial colonization, where the legume family utilizes its unique biological architecture to house rhizobium and bradyrhizobium bacteria. The plant initiates the construction of specialized structures known as nodules, creating a secure, oxygen-controlled environment attached directly to the root hair. Within these microscopic bunkers, The bacteria are deployed to perform a task that industrial chemistry can only achieve with massive infrastructure, the fracturing of atmospheric dinitrogen. The central component to this operation are atmospheres. Yet, the bacteria execute this molecular severance at ambient soil temperatures, turning a stable, unusable gas into reactive ammonia. This compound is then rapidly assimilated by the plant, providing the essential raw material for creating amino acids and proteins. This service, however, is not a donation. It is a transaction. In exchange for the reliable delivery of ammonia, the host plant must divert a significant percentage of its photosynthetic output down to the root zone. The bacteria demand a steady stream of carbon-rich sugars and carbohydrates to fuel the energy-intensive nitrogenase reaction. This metabolic exchange represents a substantial cost to the legume, which effectively taxes its own above-ground growth to maintain the subterranean workforce. The sugars act as the primary power source for the bacterial engine, driving the synthesis of ammonium compounds that eventually wind up in the plant's tissue. Verification of this underground industry requires a physical audit of the root system. The primary gauge of this symbiotic health is the physical presence and density of the nodules themselves. These structures are not merely random growths but purpose-built biological factories. A robust, well-nodulated root system indicates that the plant has successfully recruited and is actively maintaining its microbial partners. Without the formation of these distinct structures, the bacteria remain free-living in the soil, incapable of delivering the promised nutrient payload. The producer must monitor this structural development to ensure the symbiosis is yielding a return on the biological investment. Crucially, the legume exerts absolute authority over this relationship. The plant operates with a ruthless efficiency, constantly sensing the nutrient levels in the surrounding soil matrix. If the roots detect an abundance of free nitrates, perhaps from a previous application of synthetic fertilizer, the plant will immediately restrict the flow of carbohydrates to the nodules. This regulatory mechanism prevents the waste of precious energy. The plant will always choose to scavenge available nitrogen for free, rather than pay the high metabolic price of supporting a bacterial colony. Understanding this biological throttle is the key to managing fertility restrictions. It explains why adding synthetic nitrogen to a legume crop often results in a lazy root system that refuses to fix its own supply. While the biochemical machinery is elegant, its activation is entirely conditional. The system does not run on a constant loop. It modulates based on necessity and resource availability. This creates a scenario where the theoretical potential of the crop often diverges from the actual field reality. As the growing season progresses, the volume of nitrogen generated is dictated not just by the presence of bacteria, but by the intricate balance of stand density, species selection, and environmental stress. Consequently, relying on this biological mechanism involves navigating a complex set of variables that determine the final deposit into the soil bank. The assumption that any member of the legume family will automatically replenish the soil bank account is a calculated risk that often leads to agronomic deficit. The actual atmospheric nitrogen sequestered into the soil profile is not a fixed constant but a volatile variable, dictated by a rigid set of biological constraints including species selection, stand density, and the precise duration of the growing season. Research indicates a massive divergence in performance across different systems. While a poorly managed plot may contribute as little as 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre annually, a dense, perennial stand is capable of exceeding 300 pounds per acre. When valued at a hypothetical market rate of 40 cents per pound of nitrogen, this biological variance translates into an economic swing ranging from a negligible $8 to a substantial $120 per acre. To achieve the upper limits of this potential, the producer must maintain a high biomass threshold. Data tables reveal that scattered clover plants contributing minimal dry matter yield a negligible return of 1 to 5 pounds of nitrogen. In stark contrast, a thick stand generating 1,500 pounds of dry matter per acre can elevate that contribution to between 30 and 60 pounds in a single rotation. However, generating this biomass is only the first step in the equation. The critical distinction lies in distinguishing between nitrogen fixed and nitrogen returned. The management of the legume at maturity maturity determines whether the field acts as a production factory or a nutrient mine. Harvesting a legume for hay effectively exports the vast majority of the protein-bound nitrogen from the immediate environment. For example, the soybean crop harvested for hay with most leaves intact might yield 1.5 tons per acre. However, this removal strips nearly 86 pounds of nitrogen from the field, leaving little residual credit for the subsequent crop. In this scenario, the biological machinery worked primarily for the livestock feed bunk rather than the soil microbiome. Conversely, the decision to plow down a dense stand of alfalfa or hairy vetch triggers a massive mineralization event. This process releases a surge of nutrients as the plant tissue decomposes, directly transferring the biological wealth to the next rotation. A full stand of alfalfa, which includes an estimated 1 ton of root mass per acre, creates a subterranean reservoir containing approximately 120 pounds of nitrogen. This root contribution is particularly significant in perennial systems, where the below-ground biomass can equal the top growth, storing nutrients in a stable organic form that persists long after the surface vegetation is terminated. This contrasts sharply with short-season annual legumes like peas or annual clovers, which possess smaller root architectures and prioritize nitrogen fixation mainly for their own seed production. Once the seed is set, the plant's nitrogen budget is effectively spent, leaving a minimal surplus for the following cash crop. To maximize the nutrient credit, the producer must treat the legume not merely as a secondary crop, but as a calibrated green manure calculator, timing the termination to align with peak biomass accumulation. The potential to unlock 300 pounds of nitrogen exists, but it requires specific management protocols that prioritize soil incorporation over biomass exportation. Yet, even the highest-yielding species will fail to initiate this symbiotic process if the soil's chemical foundation is flawed, as the entire operation is contingent upon a specific set of environmental parameters. The biological machinery described previously functions only within a narrow chemical corridor, and deviation from this path results in immediate system failure. Just as an industrial catalyst requires a controlled environment to react, the rhizobium bacteria are notoriously sensitive to the acidity of the soil matrix. While the optimal operational window sits near a neutral pH of 7.0, the system encounters a critical failure point when conditions degrade. Research indicates that once soil pH falls below 6.0, the survival rates of these microscopic partners plummet, effectively shutting down the fixation process before it begins. This sensitivity underscores the financial mandate of managing soil acidity through liming, as the bacteria cannot construct their nitrogen-fixing bunkers in a hostile acidic landscape. Beyond simple acidity, the enzymatic engines driving nitrogen conversion demand a substantial fuel source. The process is energy-intensive, requiring adequate levels of phosphorus and potassium to catalyze the reaction. Unlike grasses, which can often scavenge effectively in lower fertility zones, legumes possess higher fertility requirements and are far more sensitive to nutrient deficiencies. Without these macronutrients to fuel the metabolic exchange, the energy transfer stalls. The result is a legume stand that may survive but remains unproductive and unreliable, unable to uphold its end of the symbiotic trade agreement. A common agronomic error involves seeding legumes into depleted soils in hopes of a restorative miracle, only to encounter a colonization failure. If the bacteria are unable to inhabit the root hairs due to chemical hostility or lack of strain specificity, the plant enters a survival mode. Bacterial strain optimized for alfalfa is biologically incompatible with clover. The introduction of these biological units requires a meticulous inoculation process, often involving the coating of the seed with live bacteria carried in a protective peat or liquid medium. This living coating is fragile. Exposure to direct ultraviolet light, excessive heat during transport, or direct contact with synthetic fertilizers can sterilize the inoculant, rendering the application useless. Commercial inoculants must be handled like live cargo, utilized before their expiration date, and applied with a sticking agent to ensure thorough coverage. Once established, a successful colonization leaves a residual population in the soil capable of persisting for 2 to 5 years, potentially inoculating subsequent plantings. However, relying on native populations is a calculated risk. Without a guaranteed history of the specific legume, the most reliable practice is to reintroduce the correct strain with every planting. Ultimately, the biological chemical plant cannot construct the necessary machinery without a foundation of adequate phosphorus phosphorus and potassium levels, operating within the correct pH environment. Improving infertile soils to these acceptable levels requires calculated applications of lime and macronutrients to secure the investment. Only when the soil chemistry acts as a willing host does the legume proceed to unlock its secondary function, the creation of a dense physical barrier. Next, we explore how this accumulated biomass fundamentally alters the hydraulic architecture of the field. Beyond nutrient chemistry, the physical presence of legume biomass transforms the field from a passive substrate into an active water management system. In conventional agriculture, the fallow period often leaves the soil surface exposed to the direct impact of precipitation. When rain strikes bare earth, the kinetic energy of the droplets dislodges soil particles, destroying surface structure and sealing the natural pores. This process, known as crusting, prevents water from entering the profile, forcing it to flow laterally across the surface. This runoff carries away the most fertile fraction of the topsoil, stripping the land of its productive capacity. Integrating legume cover crops creates a living mulch that intercepts this energy, acting as a kinetic shield that protects the soil aggregations below. Data from SARE confirms that the consistent use of legume covers can increase soil organic matter by a range of 8% to 114% compared to fallow systems. This increase in organic matter acts as a massive biological sponge, drastically improving water infiltration rates and reducing current velocity during heavy storm events. The root systems of these plants further contribute to this stability by binding soil particles together, creating macropores that allow air and water to penetrate deep into the subsoil. This results in a field that is more resilient to drought, as the improved structure captures and stores rainfall rather than allowing it to evaporate or flee the field boundaries. This biological armor performs a second, equally critical function. It serves as a rapidly deployable nutrient reservoir. The speed at which this reservoir unlocks is strictly dictated by the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of the crop residue. Grass residues, such as rye or wheat straw, possess a high carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. This chemical composition makes them resistant to decay, often tying up soil nitrogen for extended periods as microbes work to break down the tough fibrous material. This slow decomposition can be detrimental if the following crop requires immediate nutrition. In strict contrast, legume residues are characterized by a low carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. This signals a readily available food source for the soil microbiome. Upon termination, legume biomass decomposes rapidly, fueling a burst of microbial activity that mineralizes organic nitrogen back into a plant-available form. This rapid breakdown ensures that the nutrients scavenged and fixed during the cover crop window are released quickly, offering a synchronized nutrient delivery for the subsequent cash crop. The environmental efficiency of this system is measurable. By physically covering the soil and strictly scavenging residual nitrates, legumes create a sealed agronomic loop. In systems where bare soil is left vulnerable, nitrates frequently leach below the root zone, contaminating groundwater. However, the presence of a legume cover reduces nitrogen pollution, entering waterways by an average of 48%, with high-performance systems achieving reductions as high as 89%. This capability aligns with the right source principle of nutrient stewardship, ensuring that fertility investments remain a stored asset rather than becoming an environmental liability. The physical benefits are clear, yet a synchronization problem remains between release and demand. While the decomposition of legume residue generates a rapid nutrient release compared to grasses, the process is still governed by the biological variables of temperature and moisture. The producer relies on natural decay to feed a high-stakes crop, a mechanism that lacks the precise control of a mechanical valve. This reliance on passive breakdown sets the stage for a logistical conflict between biological time and agronomic necessity. The reliance on decomposing residue introduces a chaotic variable that modern precision agriculture struggles to manage, the critical element of timing. While the industrial fertilizer factory delivers specific nutrient loads on a strict logistical schedule, the biological release of nitrogen from plowed-down legumes is driven entirely by microbial activity. This activity is not automated or programmable. It is strictly dependent on If the spring season is unseasonably cold and wet, soil bacteria remain sluggish, and the decomposition process stalls. In this scenario, the nitrogen-rich legume residue sits in the furrow, effectively locking the nutrients in a biological vault that the young, starving crop cannot access. The potential energy is present, but it is chemically inaccessible at the moment of highest necessity. Unfortunately, the inverse scenario presents an equally dangerous risk. A warm, wet autumn might trigger a rapid acceleration of decomposition after the cash crop has already completed its life cycle or been harvested. In this instance, the microbes work overtime to release nitrogen into the soil profile when no root system is present to capture it. This asynchrony transforms distinct assets into liabilities. The free nitrogen is susceptible to winter rains, leaching into aquifers or volatilizing into the atmosphere rather than fueling production. This volatility highlights the inherent unpredictability that contrasts sharply with the goal of precise nutrient management. To prevent potential yield losses caused by this delayed or mistimed release, producers are forced into a defensive agronomic posture. Farmers frequently apply synthetic nitrogen fertilizers as a form of defensive over-fertilization, effectively negating the economic advantage of the cover crop to ensure yield stability. This practice reintroduces the environmental and economic drawbacks associated with synthetic nitrogen, such as greenhouse gas emissions and aquatic pollution, thereby undermining the sustainability benefits of utilizing legumes in the first place. The ultimate objective of modern fertility management is to achieve the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship: right source, right rate, right time, and right place. This comprehensive framework serves as the global standard for optimizing nutrient use efficiency in agriculture. When evaluated against this metric, the traditional legume system presents a conflicted report card. Legumes excel at providing the right source atmospheric nitrogen fixed directly from the air and can be managed for the right place, depositing fertility directly within the root zone. However, they inherently fail to satisfy the right rate and right time requirements. Because the nutrient release is dictated by weather-dependent decay rather than crop demand, the producer cannot guarantee the correct volume of nitrogen is available at the specific moment of uptake. The amount of nitrogen actually available to the subsequent crop can fluctuate significantly based on the volume of biomass generated and the speed of its decay. This inability to guarantee delivery at the precise moment of metabolic uptake creates an efficiency ceiling that biology alone struggles to break. This limitation has driven the agricultural industry to seek a hybrid solution that combines the sustainability of biological sourcing with the consistency of industrial delivery. The gap between biological potential and agronomic reliability is effectively closing through the application of new technology. This necessitates a move beyond the passive reliance on rot and decay, shifting instead toward an active, programmed delivery system. For centuries, the acquisition of biological nitrogen was tethered to the slow decomposition of organic matter. This innovation targets the metabolic giants of the agricultural world, commodity crops like corn, spring wheat, and sorghum plants that historically lacked the biological architecture to secure their own atmospheric sustenance. Unlike traditional legume systems that demand a specific crop rotation to build soil fertility over months or years, these microbial products function as a direct input, applied meticulously to the seed or injected into the furrow at planting. Once introduced to the soil profile, these engineered bacteria adhere to the developing root structure, forming a symbiotic biofilm that expands in tandem with the plant's growth. This creates a biological supply line that operates independently of the previous year's crop residue. The bacteria inhabit the rhizosphere, the narrow, biologically active region of soil directly influenced by root secretions, and begin the energy-intensive process of atmospheric fixation immediately upon colonization. The operational advantage of this technology lies in its temporal consistency. Desired nutrient release is no longer a gamble against the weather. Instead of waiting for organic mineralization to release nutrients in unpredictable surges, these microbial agents are designed to feed the root system through a continuous, daily metabolic exchange. This mechanism effectively bypasses the volatility of the mineralization gap, ensuring that the plant receives a steady stream of ammonia exactly when metabolic demand is highest. It functions analogously to a biological intravenous drip, distinct from the bulk application of granular salts that sit vulnerable on the soil surface, awaiting rain to dissolve them. A critical technological breakthrough involves the suppression of natural feedback loops. In native soil populations, nitrogen-fixing bacteria possess a survival mechanism that rigidly conserves energy. They cease fixation the moment they detect abundant synthetic nitrogen in the surrounding environment. This biological switch severely limits the effectiveness of wild inoculants in conventional high-yield systems. To counter this, companies like Pivot Bio have developed proprietary strains that are genetically reprogrammed to ignore this inhibition signal. These specialized microbes continue to operate their nitrogenase enzymes even in the presence of synthetic fertilizer, maintaining a dual-stream supply that conventional biology would naturally shut down. This persistence allows the producer to establish a reliable, season-long base of nitrogen that reduces the reliance on massive, energy-intensive synthetic pulses. By anchoring a significant portion of the crop's fertility requirements directly in the root zone, the farmer can systematically dial back broadcasting rates. The resulting agronomic math is compelling. Reducing the volume of volatile surface nitrogen directly correlates to a substantial decrease in nitrous oxide emissions. Because the nitrogen is produced immediately adjacent to the root hair, it is rapidly assimilated, leaving little opportunity for the molecule to volatilize into greenhouse gases or leach into local aquifers. This technology represents a fundamental philosophical shift from farming nitrogen through biomass accumulation to farming it through direct microbial association. It allows the high-output monocultures that underpin the global food supply chain to access the same biological advantages previously reserved for legumes. The resulting reduction in the crop's energy footprint is not merely an environmental statistic, but a measurable efficiency gain. By reprogramming the microbial workforce to serve the cash crop directly, producers can maintain the aggressive yield targets of modern agriculture while finally stepping off the treadmill of specific synthetic dependencies. It is the precise convergence of ancient biological machinery and modern genetic understanding, creating a production model that is both high-yielding and metabolically self-sufficient. However, the arrival of this precision tool does not necessitate the abandonment of foundational agronomic principles. Ultimately, the optimal strategy involves a strategic integration of ancient agronomy and futuristic biotechnology. By fusing the massive soil-building capacity of dense legume rotations with the metabolic precision of emerging microbial tools, the adherence to energy-intensive synthetics is drastically curtailed. This hybrid approach allows the modern operation to construct a fertility program that is both biologically diverse and capable of weathering market volatility. The immediate task is to meticulously evaluate the soil bank account to determine which biological asset, whether living biomass or engineered bacteria, yields the highest return. This synthesis establishes the foundation for resilient, self-sufficient production.